My YouTube metrics suggest that if you found this channel, it was likely one of two ways: the Let's Play series on Journey of Wrestling, or the original Violent Profiles video on BloodStorm. That microdosed acid trip of a game lacked coverage until Matt McMuscles decided to rank it among the worst fighting games of all time back in 2022. The amount of traffic and engagement it brought my humble channel even years after its arrival in cyberspace is what inspired me to finally return to this series in the first place. So you wouldn't be watching this video without BloodStorm, and BloodStorm wouldn't exist without the subject of this video. See, in 1992 there was a different weapons-based limb-lopping kill-tastic fighting game developed by incredible technologies that draws fighters from various points in time.
Time Killer.
I'm Eric J. Chucky, and welcome to Violent Profiles, where we discuss obscure fighting games and the rosters that define them. I first encountered Time Killers at the front of our local Value City. Or maybe it was Odd Lots. The logo was definitely orange. Either way, I wasn't interested in shopping there, but my mom and aunt were, so I was given a few quarters to keep me busy, and Time Killers was the option I chose. See, back in ancient times before smartphones, sometimes stores, restaurants, bars, and other businesses would have a few cabinets to pass the time with. It was amazing. Customers were encouraged to linger and buy more. Small change had a purpose. You could hear Pac-Man noises everywhere. If they had known what I was playing, they would not have been cool with that. I was like 8. They gave me a disapproving look when I played the Simpsons arcade game. I can't imagine the flack I would have gotten for this decapitation simulator. I also spent some time with the Genesis port, renting it at some point after it was released 4 years later, but we're going to be talking about the arcade game today because, well, look at the alternative. The story is barely more than a summary in the manual itself. Warriors throughout history have been unknowingly frustrating the villainous embodiment of Death by defeating his dark agents. Tired of their nonsense, Death has claimed each of them and is forcing them to battle one another. The victor has the honor of facing Death in single combat, and if they win, they gain immortality. As simple a plot as it still manages to make zero sense under scrutiny. You'll see. What causes Time Killers to stand out from its underwhelming combat and somewhat bland characters the manual describes as eternal combatants is the unique feature of being able to kill your opponent at any time during the match. You can also choose to cut off one or both of their arms, rendering them unable to use those limbs in combat, which is pretty neat and would probably appeal to Bart Simpson.
Whoa!
Let's start with Rancid, a series of tropes I wish we'd seen more versions of in the FGC. This absolute icon of Gen X pastiche has a backstory befitting the Crow and wields a frickin' chainsaw. He hails from New Chicago, and we have but a few short months before his timeline arrives. I don't know about you, but I've been waiting for our society to descend into Streets of Fire rules since I was a kid, so I'm glad we don't have to wait much longer. Rancid was abandoned in the decaying Undercity around the turn of the new millennium, forced to fend for himself and not beholden to the corrupt morality of the social elite. This led Rancid to be a Casey Jones-like figure.
Do you want a fist in the mouth?
Mysterious vigilante playing by his own rules and doing what he thought was right as opposed to what was accepted behavior by those in power.
Wait, is that what you think?
The nail that sticks out gets hammered down, of course, and a series of grisly murders are pinned on Rancid, turning the city he loves against him. In a mad race against time, being pursued by both the police and the underground that raised him, Rancid tracks down the real killer, a mysterious figure named Plague who carves an X in the head of each of his victims. Rancid nearly becomes one himself before he uses a chainsaw to slaughter the murderer and promptly disappears into Death's clutches. This brings us to our first narrative anomaly, a plot hole, if you will. Death's motivation to send evil goons here is to thwart an opposing entity known as Leif. Very creative, I know, they didn't ask much of us back in the 90s. You'll see a lot of these themes in every backstory, morbid characters and inky black sludge monsters assailing our heroes throughout history. Here's the thing, if Death can zorp you into this tournament of the afterlife without you being dead, why doesn't he just do this before the hero is victorious over his minions? The endings don't even really capitalize on this, and usually it would have been more interesting if they did. Rancid's ending is just him revving his chainsaw in victory. Let's say he instead did fall to Death's artisanal serial killer, thus taking out one of life's champions. His ending could have instead seen him return to max health and chop up Plague with a chainsaw, clearing his own name and fighting as an icon of the people of New Chicago forevermore. In fact, here's a quick overall rewrite for you so I don't keep repeating myself. We keep the life versus death thing, but Death snaps since Life keeps effortlessly defeating him with champions who aren't even aware of the significance. So Death goes back through time when he was closest to victory and nabs each of the warriors, forcing them to fight in the tournament to see who will gain immortality. Only there's a plan B. Once victorious, Death offers the warrior to serve under him, otherwise they'll have to fight him as their final opponent. Your chosen hero would tell Death to kick rocks, get a little bit more pathos, and theoretically have a better ending. Anyway, let's jump to Lord Wolf, who I'm honestly not sure why they didn't just call King Arthur. He hails from Camelot, wields Excalibur, looks the part, Arthur's even got an antagonist named Mordred, which would keep with the theming of Death's subordinates. But no, instead we have Count Morbid, the tyrannical ruler of Spinstershire. Wolf at some point leaves Camelot for this terribly named locale, and soon after has his wife and children kidnapped by the nefarious Count. Naturally, this leads him to start a revolution, culminating in a midnight battle during a thunderstorm. Lightning strikes Wolf's sword and is redirected into Morbid, bringing peace to the town as the storm subsides. But Arthur, wow, I literally typed that out of reflex, holy hell. Wolf has disappeared to be forced into Death's idiot tournament. It's a stretch to say that anyone in this game has a fighting style. They mostly just make long, awkward punches and kicks or bop you with their weapon of choice. However, I do have to question making so many of a character like the sword-wielding Wolf's moves things like super kicks and uppercuts instead of using, the sword. If you're going to make a weapon battler, let them use their weapons. Criminy, he's not a young book. He can at least shoot lightning, though the button combo to get him to do that is kinda weird. You have to hold back and the head button to have him taunt, but before he actually screams, Excalibur, you hit forward and he does a glitchy looking thrust, and one sperm of electricity fires off. Why aren't more of his moves using the sweet electrified version of his sword? I feel like cutting a guy with a lightning sword would be a hell of a lot more impactful than this. If Arthur Wolf is successful in defeating Death, he's crowned as King of Spinstershire. Hooray. At least he unambiguously has returned to his own time, unlike our next fighter, Musashi. He might be based off a real person, the legendary Kensei Miyamoto Musashi, but his backstory is a weird bastardization to the tale of the Yofune Nushi, a sea serpent who demanded virgin sacrifices until one young woman outsmarted and defeated the dragon. The Time Killer's Musashi led an army of invincible samurai, never having lost in battle or even suffered a single casualty until he ran afoul of the fire-breathing Yofune Nushi, who destroyed literally his entire army. Musashi bravely ran away, spent years getting folked, and finally returned to vanquish the dragon, but neither emerged from their epic confrontation within its lair. Maybe if the army had done more front-flip drop kicks to the dragon, they wouldn't have been baked alive in their armor. Most of Musashi's arsenal consists of using his two blades, a fighting trait of the real Miyamoto Musashi, to attack anything 5 inches in front of his chest. He gets a pretty sweet wall jump, which initially made me feel like he'd be a pretty viable combatant, but his insistence on only using his swords against enemies that are already hugging him complicated that. If you beat the game with Musashi, his honorable spirit lives on in harmony with his people. So I guess Death decided not to grant him immortality after all? I'm sure everyone in the arcade was glad to have dropped $20 worth of quarters on that. Let's move on to Matrix, who isn't from the past but the future, both in terms of her in-game origins and the stuff she predates. The Matrix movie wouldn't come out for another 7 years, but here's our girl fighting an oppressive robotic regime nonetheless. She hails from a world after the colonization of space in the year 3297. In fact, her bio opens with, Matrix was 4 years old when the cyber wars began on Mars, her home planet. The short version is a rogue AI sent by Death called the Master Drone reprogrammed all the servitor robots and started an uprising. Matrix joined the fight when she came of age and even accepted a replacement cybernetic arm when her biological one was lost in the conflict. It was this arm that gave her the edge over the Master Drone, and despite Death's agent attacking her on both, quote, physical and binary levels, Matrix sliced it to bits with her photon blade and crushed its living heart with her bionic hand. Having chosen the red ending, all machines fell lifeless across Mars, but Matrix herself was lost to death. Between her extendo fist and lightsaber, Matrix has pretty decent reach, but like the rest of the roster, her moves are underwhelming. I dig her Sonya Blade by way of Tron aesthetic, but it's fighting against a pretty heavy albatross of, being in Time Killers. If you beat the game, you're informed she led her troops to victory against alien Hordes, preserving the future of humanity, which isn't at all her backstory. At least they built a statue in her honor, I guess. Better than putting her name on a wall. Who's next? Leif? The game calls him Leif, which is amusing to me. I guess some parts of the Netherlands pronounce it that way, but they seem to be in the vast minority. Most say Leif, or Leif. Perhaps it's meant to be a play on the warriors in this game supposedly working for an entity called Life, but that might be giving the designers too much credit given the rest of the story. I assume inspired by Leif Erikson, this Viking opposed the Black Army, led by the mysterious Black Thorn. No matter how many ships he smashed and armies he conquered, Leif couldn't find the leader of his greatest antagonists. So he conjured up a brilliant plan to get himself captured and brought to Black Thorn's lair of the unknown. They tortured him, battered him, and weakened him to the point of near uselessness so that once he was brought before Black Thorn, he could be effortlessly executed. But a true Viking always holds on to something, and Leif used his last remaining ounce of adrenaline to catch Black Thorn off guard and, quote, send him into eternal darkness. This is a game about cutting people's arms off. You can just say he killed him. For my money, Leif is the worst character on the roster. Short reach, clumsy specials, if you can call them that, a lack of power behind his blows, constantly screams, Odin! I wasn't personally impressed. Neither is death, apparently, as when you beat the game, Leif is another soul not granted immortality. Instead, the Norse gods are the ones to reward Leif, granting him his greatest wish to forever sail the seven seas, glowing brightly during any and all day-for-night shots he may be party to. Back to the future with Orion from 2885 AD, he has the Luke Skywalker urge to escape his measly backwater space station home and explore the deepest reaches of the galaxy. Unlike Luke Skywalker, Orion just goes to school and gets his pilot's license, immediately commandeering an experimental dimensional slide craft. Upon returning from his jaunt, he finds his home overrun by Clintar-looking abominations. But when he reports this to the proper authorities, they arrest him, thinking him responsible. Somehow. That sounds stupid, but given the last few years of police ineptitude, I'm not as incredulous as I might have been in the past. Orion escapes and gets in the ship, scouring space for the real culprit. Hang on, for a second there I thought this was meant to be a parody of the O.J. Simpson trial, but that wasn't until 1995. Did the makers of this game actually have some kind of time travel at their disposal, and only used it to make second-rate knockoffs of stuff that hadn't happened yet? Anyhow, Orion can't find the goo monsters, so he just sort of becomes a legendary space outlaw, collecting treasure and kicking ass. He gets a tip about where the shadow creatures might come from, heads off, and finds his way into the tournament, which makes his abduction the one-time death stop to consider, hang on, maybe I should just kidnap them before they kill my greatest soldiers. Orion moves bizarrely, looks like an aged-up Harlan band from Space Cases, and fights with an electro saber, which is just a big dagger with the edges painted teal. My favorite parts about him are, win or lose, he floats up into the sky after the match is over, and if you beat the game with him, he just goes back to wandering around space. No follow-up on his search for the goo fiends, no specific destination, just off he goes in search of generic prey. You know, the more I think about it, Orion might be the protagonist of, like, Starfield. He had a goal with a lot of motivation, but then got distracted collecting all the secret trophies instead of completing it. Sounds like the player character in a Bethesda game to me. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Mantas, or more specifically, the Queen of the Mantas. She's the only playable character who is explicitly evil, at least in the sense that her goal is to wipe out the human race and inhabit Earth in their stead. Mantas is from the year 4002, long after Orion and even Matrix's times, and with as capable and durable as her people are, they seem poised to succeed in annihilating humanity. Then the Queen disappears, and like freshman college students, the rest of the Mantas don't know what to do without their mom, so eventually they just integrate with human society. The manual speculates that Mantas is the only fighter Death Zorped not for being an agent of life who thwarted his plans, but for having the audacity to almost accomplish what he failed to do. Beat the game with her, and it implies she does exactly that, brooding over a new batch of eggs in triumph on a planet that belongs to her people. Mantas is by far the most unique fighter in the game, attacking with spinning blade arms, an extendo head, eye lasers, and even possessing the option to fly short distances. She's also a 7-foot-tall mantis alien, which in case you didn't know is not a common trope in most video games. This doesn't make her the best fighter, however. To award that honor, we need to go to the past. 20,000 BC, in the aftermath of the war between the cavemen and the lizard-like alien creatures known as troglodytes, Thug stands triumphant. At his feet is the Supreme One, leader of the troglodytes, and it looks like he'll be leading humanity into a new era of prosperity when... Zorp? Don't get me wrong, Thug is ugly. He's the worst looking character in this game, and that's saying something. I distinctly remember Time Killers being less hideous, but maybe that was my impressionable juvenile mind not grasping exactly what made good art and what clearly didn't. Or maybe I just didn't fight Thug much back then. His very large body only throws more into relief how terrible the art and shading are. It reminds me of that phase a lot of artists go through while learning to color art digitally, myself included, where they pillow shade every drawing with mushy colors and garish textures. Some of these clips are similar to the art style I'm talking about. Too much highlight using uniform colors for both it and the shading, and even still, this looks a lot better. I don't have any of my drawings from back then, and I'm not picking on some poor teenage deviant artist, so the Real Adventures of Johnny Quest intro will have to do. If you watched high-action animation from the late 90s/early aughts, you've seen what I'm referring to from artists with much better training than the folks who put together Time Killers. Most of us grew out of that. Thug is forever trapped rendered in this terrible art style. Thug also doesn't have very good special moves, but what he does have is decent power, decent reach, and few opportunities to punish. I made it a whole 3 rounds into the ladder with Thug, better than I managed with any other character. If you're better at Time Killers than me, and if so, why, you might make it all the way to the end with him, defeating death to return home and accidentally create fire, jump-starting humanity's technological advancement. Okay, well there's actually some debate about humans discovering fire way earlier, but much like Vikings not wearing horned helmets and samurai not being in the business of front-flip dropkicks, we didn't know that back in the 90s. Finally, we come to the boss of the game, Death. What the hell is that? Oh my god, he looks like, Whoa, I don't even have a joke. This is terrible character design. Rob Liefeld wouldn't tell you this looks cool. Why is he dressed like Kmart Thanos? What's going on with his weird feet? Why is his hair made out of spicy Cheetos? Look, around the same time, I also introduced Death as a villain for my original character superhero, inspired by the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse appearing in the Archie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series around when Time Killers made its arcade debut. However, much like the TMNT, I had the decency to make him a skeleton in a robe. And need I remind you that I was like 7 or 8? This is terrible design. This is a rejected minor He-Man villain. This should not be the final boss of your game, even if the rest of your character designs look like this. Whatever. Time Killers as a concept had potential, but unfortunately it was executed upon with the clumsy earnestness of easily distracted preteens. Imagine if the roster were doubled, Death forcing the heroes to battle his minions again on his terms. Seeing figures like Blackthorn and Count Morbid could add to their presence and give us edgy 90s kids badass evil figures to root for. Could you imagine playing an Icarus Black Blob monster before BlazBlue's Arakune or even Marvel vs. Capcom's Venom?
Could you imagine?
It probably wouldn't have even been that good anyhow. Instead of Time Killer's spiritual successor taking the game's good concepts and improving on them, they seemed to cherry pick everything that didn't work, like the clumsy character design, stiff movements, and bad storytelling, and jammed it all into BloodStorm with a little extra shock poured on top for good measure. Both of Incredible Technology's fighting entries had a lot of potential and even more ambition, but I'm a little more forgiving of BloodStorm because it managed to be its own thing, whereas Time Killers got shown up in every way just a year later with Eternal Champions. So similar are these two games, in fact, that I have to wonder if Time Killers was a secret inspiration for Eternal Champions, or perhaps it even spurred the creators to make a better game in the same vein out of spite, just to prove it could be done. Some of the parallels between the two are oddly specific. Regardless, our time today has come to a close. Next time on Violent Profiles, we'll finally get to the game I started this series to cover, an oft-forgotten and, in my not-so-humble opinion, underrated gem. Hey, if you liked this video, could you hit the like button and tell me what you liked about it in the comment section? This not only feeds my fragile ego, but it also tells YouTube to promote the show. And the only way I get pancakes is if this show does well. Spam low kick on that subscribe button if you haven't already, and support us on Patreon at the $10 tier to get new episodes a month early. Shout out to all the names currently on screen for doing exactly that, and until next time, white out.